The rain poured down on the small colony outpost of New Horizon, a steady drumbeat against metal roofs and makeshift shelters. Lena pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she hurried through the muddy streets. Her 3 children struggled to keep pace, 8-year-old Miro holding his 5-year-old sister Taya's hand, while Lena clutched baby Pell against her chest, protecting the infant from the downpour. The blue markings on Lena's face had once been symbols of her family status. Now they were stained with the deep indigo of widowhood, a constant reminder of the mining accident that had taken her husband Soren 4 months ago. She glanced at a public screen broadcasting news of the human trade delegation's arrival. Their ship had landed yesterday, bringing hope of new investments and opportunities to the struggling Narian colony. "Keep up, Miro," Lena called over her shoulder, her 4 eyes scanning the crowded market square where the delegation would appear. The children's skin, a pale blue that matched her own, was already soaked despite her best efforts. "We must find a good spot." Narians of all castes had gathered to witness the delegation. Tall and thin with 4 eyes, 2 large primary ones, and 2 smaller ones above. They moved with natural grace even in the dismal weather. Lena noticed how the higher-caste Narians wore protective covers against the rain, while families like hers made do with whatever they had. "Why are we here, Mother?" Miro asked, his voice barely audible over the crowd and rain. Lena didn't answer. How could she explain to her children that this was their last hope? After Soren's death, his mining guild had claimed most of their possessions as compensation for his unfulfilled contract. Next week, they would take their home. Without a provider, the children would become wards of the colony, likely separated and assigned to various labor programs. The thought made her 4 eyes blink rapidly in distress. A hush fell over the crowd as the delegation emerged from the colony administration building. 5 humans walked alongside the Narian governor, their skin tones ranging from light tan to deep brown, so different from Narian blue. Lena stared at them, trying to identify the leader. Her eyes settled on a tall human male in a gray suit that seemed to repel the raindrops. He moved with confidence, speaking occasionally to the governor, who nodded respectfully at whatever he said. This had to be Taho Kim, the trade minister whose name had been on all the announcements. "That's him," she whispered to herself. The officials began their formal speeches, most of which Lena couldn't hear from her position. She caught phrases about mutual prosperity and beneficial arrangements, but the words meant little to her immediate problems. As the speeches concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Lena made her decision. "Stay close," she instructed Miro, gripping his shoulder. With determination fueling each step, she pushed forward against the flow of departing Narians, heading directly toward the human delegation. A security guard stepped in her path. "Return to your dwelling, widow," he said, his upper eyes narrowing in disapproval. "The delegation has no time for personal petitions." "Please," Lena begged, "I must speak with the human minister." The guard moved to block her, but the commotion caught Taho's attention. He paused, looking over at the thin Narian woman clutching an infant, with 2 small children huddled against her legs. Something about her desperate stance made him curious. "Is there a problem?" Taho asked, his universal translator converting his words to fluid Narian. The guard bowed immediately. "No problem, honored guest. This widow was just leaving." Taho studied the woman's face, noting the deep indigo markings that his cultural briefing had explained signified recent bereavement. "What do you need?" he asked her directly. Lena swallowed hard, gathering her courage. "Honored human, I request a private audience. I have a matter of great importance to discuss." The guard looked scandalized, but Taho merely raised an eyebrow. "We're heading to meetings now, but I can spare 5 minutes in the reception hall." 20 minutes later, Lena stood in the warm, dry reception hall of the administration building, her children wide-eyed at the luxury around them. Hell had stopped crying now that they were out of the rain, and Miro and Taya huddled close to their mother, intimidated by the unfamiliar surroundings. Tahoe entered with just one assistant, having dismissed the rest of his entourage. "Now, what was so urgent that you braved the guards to speak with me?" he asked, his tone kind but businesslike. Lena took a deep breath. According to Narian customs, what she was about to do was shameful, perhaps even scandalous. But desperation had overridden her cultural inhibitions. Honored Tahoe Kim, she began formally. "I am Lena, widow of Soren, mining technician who died in the eastern shaft collapse." She paused, gathering her courage. "I come to offer myself as your wife, in exchange for protection and provision for my children." The silence that followed was absolute. Tahoe's assistant gasped softly, while Tahoe himself remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Lena kept her 4 eyes downcast, as was proper when making such an offer, though her heart pounded with fear and shame. "Why would you propose such a thing to a stranger?" Tahoe finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. Lena's words came rushing out. "My husband's death left us with nothing. The mining guild claims our home next week as payment for his unfinished contract. Without family status, my children will become colony wards, separated and put into labor training." She finally looked up, her 4 eyes glistening with unshed tears. "They are bright, especially Miro. On our world, they will never have a chance to be more than what their father was." Tahoe walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked colony. His company had come to negotiate resource rights, not to get involved in local social issues. Yet something about the woman's desperate offer touched him. He had read reports about the Narian caste system and its rigidity, especially on struggling colony worlds like this one. "Marriage?" he asked, turning back to her. "That seems extreme. Surely there are social services." "Not for families of debt holders," Lena interrupted, then immediately lowered her eyes, shocked at her own boldness. "Forgive me, but there is no support for those in my position. Under Narian law, a foreign spouse of sufficient means can claim family members as dependents with full protection rights." Tahoe looked at the children. The oldest boy met his gaze with a mixture of fear and hope. The girl half hid behind her mother, while the infant simply stared with all 4 eyes, curious about this strange-looking human. "And what do you know about me that makes you think I would be a suitable husband?" Tahoe asked carefully. "You built your company on fair trade practices," Lena replied. "The miners speak of how your Earth contracts include safety provisions that our own leaders don't require. I researched you before coming today. You are unmarried, wealthy, and known for ethical business dealings." Tahoe almost smiled at her thoroughness. "And you would leave your world, your people, to come to Earth?" "To save my children, I would go anywhere," Lena said simply. Miro suddenly stepped forward. "I can work," the boy said in halting standard, the language Tahoe had been speaking. "I learn fast." Tahoe knelt down to the boy's level. "How did you learn standard?" "Public broadcasts," Miro answered. "I listen every day." Tahoe stood up, making a decision that surprised even himself. "I cannot marry you today, Lena, but I won't turn you away either. There may be other solutions we haven't considered." Relief and uncertainty battled on Lena's face. "We have only 1 week before." "I understand the urgency," Tahoe interrupted gently. "For now, I'm booking rooms for you and your children at the visitors' quarters. Get some rest, eat a proper meal. Tomorrow, we'll discuss options with my legal team." As they were escorted out, Tahoe watched the small family. The assistant at his side cleared her throat. "Sir, the governor is waiting for our mineral rights proposal." "Tell him we'll need another day," Tahoe replied, still watching as Lena and her children disappeared down the corridor. "I need to make some calls to Earth." That night, as Lena tucked her children into beds softer than any they had ever known, she whispered, "Things will be better soon." "Will we really go to Earth?" Miro asked sleepily. Lena stroked his hair. "I don't know. But for tonight, we are safe and warm." Outside their window, the rain continued to fall on New Horizon Colony, but for the first time since Soren's death, Lena felt a flicker of hope. Taho Kim sat in the small conference room of the Colonial Administration Building, his tablet displaying legal codes from both Earth and Neria. Across from him, Administrator Dury's facial ridges darkened with obvious displeasure. The tall Nerian official had been arguing against Taho's proposal for nearly an hour. "What you suggest is without precedent," Dury said, his four eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of irritation. "A human taking a Nerian spouse has never been registered in our colony. Yet nothing in our treaties explicitly forbids it," Taho countered calmly. "I've reviewed both legal systems thoroughly." The administrator's upper eyes narrowed. "There are cultural considerations beyond mere legality, Mr. Kim. The woman is from a mining family. Her late husband was a simple technician with outstanding debts. She is not of suitable status for someone of your position." Taho had spent the past 3 days learning more about the rigid Nerian case system. What had initially seemed like a desperate plea from Lena had revealed itself as a complex social problem affecting many lowercase Nerians. "On Earth, we don't recognize such distinctions," Taho replied. "And according to your own interspecies laws, Section 47, Paragraph 6, marriage to a foreign national of sufficient means grants immediate protective status to all dependents." A third voice joined the conversation as Taho's legal advisor, Jin, entered the room. "I've confirmed it with both Earth Embassy and local authorities," she said, placing a document on the table. "The arrangement Mr. Kim proposes is unusual but entirely legal." Administrator Dury's skin took on a paler blue tint. What Taho had learned was a sign of resignation. "The mining guild will not be pleased to lose their claim to the children's labor contracts. They'll be compensated for any legitimate debts," Taho said firmly. "I've already transferred the funds to cover the family's obligations." An hour later, Taho found himself in a smaller room with Lena and her 3 children. The past 3 days had given them all a chance to recover from their desperate state. Clean clothes, regular meals, and safety had already made a visible difference. Miro stood straighter, Taya no longer hid behind her mother, and baby Pell seemed more animated. "The administrators have reluctantly approved our arrangement," Taho explained. "But I want to be clear about what this means." Lena nodded, all 4 eyes focused intently on him. "I am prepared to fulfill all wifely duties according to both our customs." Taho shook his head gently. "That's what we need to discuss. On Earth, marriage is a partnership. What I'm proposing is a legal arrangement that protects you and your children, not a traditional marriage." Confusion crossed Lena's face. "I don't understand. If not as your wife, what would my role be?" "You would have your own living quarters on my estate. Your children would receive education and health care. You would be free to pursue your own interests or career," Taho explained. "We would present ourselves as married for legal purposes, but our private arrangement would be different." Miro, who had been listening carefully, spoke up. "Like a protection contract." Taho smiled at the boy. "Exactly like that. Very perceptive, Miro." Lena's expression showed both relief and new confusion. "Then what would you gain from this arrangement, human lord?" "First," Taho said with a small smile, "let's start with calling me Teo, not human lord. As for what I gain..." He paused, considering his words carefully. "My company is expanding into new territories. Having a family with knowledge of Nerian culture would be valuable. You could help bridge our worlds, if you're willing." "I have no special knowledge," Lena said quietly. "I was only a mining technician's wife." "You underestimate yourself," Taho replied. "You've already shown remarkable courage and resourcefulness." Later that afternoon, they gathered in the colony's civil registration office. The space was utilitarian, with none of the ceremony Taho would have expected for a wedding. Lena wore a simple blue dress, the nicest she owned, with traditional widow's markings still visible on her face. "The marks will fade naturally over time," she had explained when Tayo asked about them. "To remove them artificially would dishonor Soren's memory." The registration official, a middle-aged Nerian female with elaborately patterned facial markings, denoting her administrative caste, regarded them with poorly concealed disapproval. "The documents require fingerprints from both parties," she said stiffly, sliding a scanner across the desk. As Tahoe pressed his fingers to the device, he noticed Miro watching with fascination. "Our hands are different," Tahoe explained to the boy. "You have 4 fingers. We have 5. Is that why humans build different tools?" Miro asked immediately. "That's a very good question," Tahoe replied, impressed by the child's quick thinking. When the official slid a document toward them for review, Tahoe noted it was written only in Narian script. "I'll need this translated," he said firmly. "Yet nothing in our treaties explicitly forbids it," Tahoe countered calmly. "I've reviewed both legal systems thoroughly." The administrator's upper eyes narrowed. "There are cultural considerations beyond mere legality, Mr. Kim. The woman is from a mining family. Her late husband was a simple technician with outstanding debts. She is not of suitable status for someone of your position." Tahoe had spent the past 3 days learning more about the rigid Narian case system. What had initially seemed like a desperate plea from Lena had revealed itself as a complex social problem affecting many lowercase Narians. "On Earth, we don't recognize such distinctions," Tahoe replied. "And according to your own interspecies laws, Section 47, Paragraph 6, marriage to a foreign national of sufficient means grants immediate protective status to all dependents." A third voice joined the conversation as Tahoe's legal advisor, Jin, entered the room. "I've confirmed it with both Earth Embassy and local authorities," she said, placing a document on the table. "The arrangement Mr. Kim proposes is unusual but entirely legal." Administrator Dury's skin took on a paler blue tint. What Tahoe had learned was a sign of resignation. "The mining guild will not be pleased to lose their claim to the children's labor contracts. They'll be compensated for any legitimate debts," Tahoe said firmly. "I've already transferred the funds to cover the family's obligations." An hour later, Tahoe found himself in a smaller room with Lena and her 3 children. The past 3 days had given them all a chance to recover from their desperate state. Clean clothes, regular meals, and safety had already made a visible difference. Miro stood straighter. Taya no longer hid behind her mother, and baby Pell seemed more animated. "The administrators have reluctantly approved our arrangement," Tahoe explained. "But I want to be clear about what this means." Lena nodded, all 4 eyes focused intently on him. "I am prepared to fulfill all wifely duties according to both our customs." Tahoe shook his head gently. "That's what we need to discuss. On Earth, marriage is a partnership. What I'm proposing is a legal arrangement that protects you and your children, not a traditional marriage." Confusion crossed Lena's face. "I don't understand. If not as your wife, what would my role be?" "You would have your own living quarters on my estate. Your children would receive education and health care. You would be free to pursue your own interests or career," Tahoe explained. "We would present ourselves as married for legal purposes, but our private arrangement would be different." Miro, who had been listening carefully, spoke up. "Like a protection contract." Tahoe smiled at the boy. "Exactly like that. Very perceptive, Miro." Lena's expression showed both relief and new confusion. "Then what would you gain from this arrangement, human lord?" "First," Tahoe said with a small smile, "let's start with calling me Tayo, not human lord. As for what I gain—" He paused, considering his words carefully. "My company is expanding into new territories. Having a family with knowledge of Narian culture would be valuable. You could help bridge our worlds, if you're willing." "I have no special knowledge," Lena said quietly. "I was only a mining technician's wife." "You underestimate yourself," Tahoe replied. "You've already shown remarkable courage and resourcefulness." Later that afternoon, they gathered in the colony's civil registration office. The space was utilitarian, with none of the ceremony Tahoe would have expected for a wedding. Lena wore a simple blue dress, the nicest she owned, with traditional widow's markings still visible on her face. "The marks will fade naturally over time," she had explained when Tayo asked about them. To remove them artificially would dishonor Soren's memory. The registration official, a middle-aged Nerian female with elaborately patterned facial markings denoting her administrative caste, regarded them with poorly concealed disapproval. The documents require fingerprints from both parties, she said stiffly, sliding a scanner across the desk. As Tahoe pressed his fingers to the device, he noticed Miro watching with fascination. Our hands are different, Tahoe explained to the boy. You have 4 fingers. We have 5. Is that why humans build different tools? Miro asked immediately. That's a very good question, Tahoe replied, impressed by the child's quick thinking. When the official slid a document toward them for review, Tahoe noted it was written only in Nerian script. I'll need this translated, he said firmly. Thank you. We will be there, Lena replied, her standard improving daily through constant practice. After waking and dressing the children in the earth clothes that had been provided for them, Lena led them to the main house. The estate was enormous by Nerian standards, a modern building of glass and stone surrounded by carefully tended gardens and trees that were just beginning to show hints of autumn colors. Tahoe waited in the bright breakfast room, reading something on his tablet. He looked up as they entered, his expression warming. Good morning, he greeted them. Did everyone sleep well? Pelt slept through the night, Lena reported, helping Taya into a chair specially adjusted for Nerian proportions. And Miro discovered your morning glory flowers. They're called morning glories because they open with the sunrise, Tahoe explained to the boy, who nodded eagerly. We had no flowers on our street in the colony, Miro said, only in the administrator's section. The breakfast was simple but still far more varied than anything the family had eaten on New Horizon. Lena watched carefully as Tahoe used his utensils, still struggling to adapt to the 5-fingered implements. Taya had fewer inhibitions, using her hands when the utensils proved too difficult. I received word from the education assessment team, Tahoe said as they ate. They'll be here tomorrow to evaluate Miro and Taya's knowledge levels. Lena's 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sign of anxiety. Will they be kind to the children? They have never been formally schooled. They're specialists in cross-species education, Tahoe assured her. They won't expect Earth standards from Nerian children. They just need to determine the best programs. I want to learn everything, Miro declared, his mouth full of fruit. Miro, remember your manners, Lena gently scolded, but Tahoe simply smiled. Your enthusiasm is good, he told the boy. Just remember to finish chewing first. After breakfast, Tahoe surprised them with an announcement. I thought we might visit the city today. You've been on the estate for 2 weeks now. It's time you saw more of your new home. The children's excitement was immediate and vocal. Even Lena felt a spark of curiosity, though it was tempered with apprehension. Will people stare at us? She asked quietly when the children were distracted. Some might, Tahoe admitted. But Seoul is an international city with various alien diplomatic missions. Blue skin isn't as unusual here as you might think. The journey into Seoul was an overwhelming sensory experience for the family. The sleek magnetic train moved faster than anything on New Horizon, and the city itself was a forest of towering buildings, flashing signs, and countless humans moving in every direction. So many, Taya whispered, clutching Lena's hand tightly as they walked from the station. Lena herself felt dizzy from the sheer scale of human civilization. Her home colony had housed perhaps 20,000 Nerians. Here, millions of humans lived stacked in gleaming towers that reached toward the sky. Tahoe led them to a large public park where the press of people was less intense. The children gradually relaxed, their natural curiosity overcoming their initial fear. Miro ran ahead to examine a pond where strange creatures with orange scales swam lazily. Fish, Tahoe explained. We keep them in ponds for decoration. On Neria, all water creatures are for eating, Lena remarked. These could be eaten too, Tahoe said with a smile. But these particular ones are pets. As they walked through the park, Lena noticed how Tahoe kept a respectful distance from her and the children in public. He was polite and attentive, but clearly maintaining the boundaries they had established. They were legally family, but still strangers in many ways. Their peaceful walk was interrupted when a group of well-dressed humans approached. Lena recognized one of them as Chun, a business associate who had visited the estate last week. "Tahoe," the man called, his smile fading slightly as he noticed Lena and the children. "I didn't expect to see you here, with your guests." "Not guests, June, my family," Tahoe corrected firmly. "You remember Lena, and these are Miro, Taya, and Pell." Jun's smile became fixed, his eyes darting between Tahoe and the blue-skinned family. "Of course. Your unusual arrangement. So good of you to help these refugees." "My wife and children are legal residents, not refugees," Tahoe replied, his tone pleasant, but with an edge that wasn't lost on anyone. Jun's companions looked distinctly uncomfortable. One woman whispered something to another, her eyes never leaving the Narian children. "We're late for our meeting," Jun said abruptly. "Good to see you, Tahoe. Mrs. Kim." He nodded stiffly at Lena before hurrying away, his group following quickly. A heavy silence fell as they continued their walk. Lena could feel the tension in Tahoe's posture. "Your friend disapproves of us," she said quietly after ensuring the children were out of earshot. "Jun isn't my friend. He's a business associate," Tahoe replied. "And his approval isn't required for my family decisions. But he is not alone in his thinking," Lena observed. "I see how others look at us. At you, for choosing us." Tahoe stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "There will always be people who fear difference, Lena, on Earth as on Neria. I didn't expect universal acceptance." "I have brought complications to your life," Lena said, her lower eyes downcast. "Life without complications isn't life at all," Tahoe replied simply. "Come, there's an ice cream stand ahead, and I promised the children a treat." The afternoon continued more pleasantly as the children discovered the joy of ice cream, their initial wariness of the cold substance giving way to delight. Pell's face was soon covered in chocolate, requiring Lena to chase him with a napkin while Tahoe laughed at the scene. As evening approached, they made their way back to the estate. The children were exhausted from the day's adventures, Taya falling asleep against Lena's shoulder on the train, while Miro fought to keep his eyes open. "Tomorrow the education specialists will come," Tahoe reminded Lena as they reached home. "But don't worry. Human schools teach children of all backgrounds. Your children won't be treated as mining caste here." Lena nodded, carrying the sleeping Taya while Tahoe carried Pell. On Neria, their futures were already decided. Here, they can choose. "What about your future, Lena?" Tahoe asked gently. "Have you thought about what you might want to do?" Lena looked surprised at the question. "My duty is to the children." "That's one role," Tahoe acknowledged. "But it doesn't have to be your only one. Think about it. You're on a new world with new possibilities." As they reached the family quarters, Lena paused before entering. "Thank you for today, for showing us that we can exist in your world." "Our world," Tahoe corrected gently. "It's your home now, too." That night, after putting the children to bed, Lena stood again on the balcony looking at the stars. Some were the same as those visible from New Horizon, but from a different angle, different perspective, she thought, like everything in her new life. For the first time since Soren's death, she allowed herself to feel a fragile hope, not just for her children's futures, but perhaps for her own as well. "This is completely unacceptable," the Narian consul's voice boomed from the view screen in Tahoe's home office. The official's 4 eyes were narrowed, his facial ridges darkened to a deep navy blue indicating extreme displeasure. "A mining-caste widow cannot simply leave our colony with her children. There are debts to be settled, obligations to fulfill." Tahoe sat calmly before the screen, his posture relaxed despite the tension in the room. 3 months had passed since he had brought Lena and her children to Earth, and things had been progressing well until this unexpected communication. Consul Nev, all debts were paid in full before we left New Horizon. Taiho replied evenly. I have the documentation with official seals. Administrator Dury himself approved our departure. New information has come to light, the consul said stiffly. The mining guild claims the children are subject to inherited labor contracts. They must return to fulfill their father's obligations. Taiho felt a cold anger building, but kept his expression neutral. The children are now under Earth Federation protection as members of my household. Any prior contracts are null and void under interspecies marriage statutes. Human laws cannot supersede Narian family codes, the consul stated flatly. The children belong to their father's mining guild. My wife and her children are under Earth Federation protection, Taiho repeated, emphasizing the word wife. Wife. The consul's tone dripped with derision. A convenient fiction. Our sources indicate you maintain separate living quarters. This is clearly a case of document fraud to circumvent proper legal channels. After the transmission ended with the consul's demand for the family's return within 15 days, Taiho sat motionless, thinking through their options. The door to his office opened quietly, and Lena entered, her expression troubled. You heard, Taiho said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Lena moved to the window, looking out at the autumn garden, where red and gold leaves drifted from the trees. They will never stop trying to reclaim us. The mining guild needs workers, and children are easier to train and control than adults. Taiho joined her at the window. In the 3 months since their arrival, Lena had changed subtly. She stood straighter, spoke more confidently, and had begun taking classes in Earth business practices. Her children were thriving. Miro had tested into an advanced learning program. Taya was quickly becoming fluent in Korean as well as Standard, and baby Pell was growing stronger every day. I won't let them take you back, Taiho said firmly. Lena turned to him, all 4 eyes filled with worry. I have been looking at your files. Taiho raised an eyebrow. My files? In your study. The ones about Narian mining reforms. She looked down at her hands. You have been funding the Miners' Rights Coalition on Naria since before we met. Taiho sighed, moving to his desk and bringing up a holographic display showing complex networks of organizations. I should have told you. My company has been working to improve conditions across all our partner worlds. The Narian mining situation is particularly troubling. Is that why you agreed to our arrangement? As part of your reform work? There was no accusation in Lena's voice, only curiosity. No, Taiho replied honestly. Those were separate issues. I agreed to our arrangement because it was the right thing to do for your family. The broader reforms are business matters. A chime announced visitors at the main entrance. Taiho checked the security feed. It's Federation officials. The consul must have filed his complaint already. Lena's hands trembled slightly. What will happen now? Now, Taiho said, straightening his jacket, we show them that our family is genuine, regardless of our sleeping arrangements. The Federation officials, a human woman named Director Pack, and a tall, green-skinned Verdani male, were led to the main living room. They were polite but clearly on official business, carrying tablets and recording devices. Mr. Kim, we're here to investigate a complaint filed by the Narian consulate regarding possible immigration fraud. Director Pack explained, her tone professional. They claim your marriage to Mrs. Kim is a fiction created to circumvent proper channels for off-world relocation. Before Taiho could respond, the sound of running feet echoed down the hallway, and Miro burst into the room, holding a school tablet. Taiho, I completed the advanced mathematics module. The teacher said I'm the first in my group to finish it. The boy stopped abruptly, noticing the strangers. I'm sorry. I didn't know you had company. Taiho smiled proudly. It's fine, Miro. That's excellent news. He turned to the officials. This is my son, Miro. He's been attending the International Academy's special program for the past 2 months. Miro bowed politely to the visitors just as Taya entered the room more cautiously, followed by Jimin carrying Pell. Papa Tayo, Taya said softly in accented Korean, is it time for our garden lesson? Taho nodded. Soon, Taya. We have guests right now. The Verdani official studied the scene with analytical eyes. The children appear well-adjusted, he noted, making a mark on his tablet. Director Pak seemed less convinced. Mr. Kim, our investigation will need to be thorough. The Narian government rarely files such complaints without cause. The cause is simple, Taho replied. The mining guild is losing its grip on the colony's workforce as more people learn about Earth's labor standards. My company has been implementing ethical labor certification across several systems, including Naria. This complaint is political retaliation. Lena stepped forward. May I show you something? Without waiting for a response, she led them to the dining room where dinner preparations were underway. The table was set for the evening meal, with specially modified seats for the Narian children and utensils adapted for their four-fingered hands. We eat together every evening, Lena explained. Taho insisted on this human tradition. On Naria, mining caste families rarely gather for meals. Work shifts make it impossible. The officials followed as Lena continued their tour, showing the children's learning spaces, their adapted bathroom facilities, and the garden where Taho had been teaching them about earth plants. Mrs. Kim, Director Pak said carefully, may I ask why you and Mr. Kim maintain separate bedrooms if this is a genuine marriage? Lena's blue skin darkened slightly, the Narian equivalent of a blush. In Narian culture, new pairs traditionally maintain separate sleeping spaces until the mourning period for previous mates has fully passed. Taho has respected this custom. The officials exchanged glances. The Verdani made another note on his tablet. Later, as the family prepared for dinner, the officials sat in the living room reviewing their findings. From the kitchen came the sounds of Taho helping Miro explain a new earth food to Taya, while Lena laughed at their descriptions. Not what I expected, Director Pak admitted quietly to her colleague. The affection appears genuine, the Verdani agreed. The children are bonded to the human. Note how the youngest reached for him when tired. When they returned to the living room, the officials found the family setting the table together, with Miro carefully explaining Earth mathematics to Taho, while Taya proudly demonstrated her progress in human language. Little Pell toddled between them all, occasionally being caught and tickled by Taho. We've completed our initial assessment, Director Pak announced. While we'll need to file a formal report, we see no immediate evidence of immigration fraud. The relief in the room was palpable. Taho nodded gratefully. Thank you for your thoroughness. After the officials departed, the family settled into their evening routine. As the children were put to bed, Lena found Taho on the terrace, staring at the night sky. You handled that well, he said as she joined him. I told the truth, Lena replied simply. We may have begun as a legal arrangement, but we have become a real family, even if not in the traditional way of either of our peoples. The Council won't stop easily, Taho warned. There will be more challenges. Then we will face them together. Lena hesitated, then gently touched Taho's hand, the first time she had initiated such contact. Thank you for fighting for us. Taho looked down at their joined hands, 5 human fingers beside 4 Narian ones. Despite their differences, they had found a way to build something meaningful together. Always, he promised, as the stars continued their eternal watch over the unlikely family. The grand hall of the Interspecies Council gleamed under soft golden lights. 2 years had passed since that rainy day on New Horizon, when Lena had first approached Tayo with her desperate proposal. Now they stood side by side before the 9 council members representing the major spacefaring species of the known galaxy. Lena's blue skin had lost the dullness of her mining colony days. She wore a formal Earth-Narian fusion dress, designed to honor both cultures. The deep indigo widow's markings on her face had faded naturally over time, leaving only the faintest trace of her past. Tahoe stood tall in a traditional Korean hanbok modified with subtle Narian patterns. Their case had become famous across Earth and several allied worlds. The human businessman and the Narian widow who had challenged two legal systems to protect three children. The council recognizes Tahoe Kim and Lena Kim, announced the human chairperson. You may present your final statement before we rule on the Interspecies Family Protection Act. Lena stepped forward, her four eyes scanning the assembled officials. 2 years ago, she would have been terrified to speak before such powerful figures. Now she stood with quiet confidence. Honored council members, when I first asked Tahoe to marry me, I believed I was surrendering my freedom to save my children. She began, her voice clear in the hushed chamber. Aunt Naria, marriage for my caste often meant servitude. I expected no different from a human. She glanced at Tahoe, who nodded encouragingly. Instead, I discovered that family can be built on respect and choice rather than obligation. My children have learned that their worth is not determined by their caste or species. This is the gift of interspecies understanding. As Lena returned to Tahoe's side, the main doors opened, and Miro entered, leading his younger siblings. Now 10 years old, the boy walked with the confidence of someone who knew his place in the world. 8-year-old Taya followed in a simple blue dress, holding 3-year-old Pel's hand. The children had not been scheduled to appear, but the council had requested their presence at the last moment. Miro bowed respectfully to the officials, a perfect blend of Narian and human etiquette. Distinguished council members, I am Miro Kim, he said in flawless standard. 2 years ago, I was destined to work in the same mines that killed my birth father. Today, I am at the top of my class in astrophysics and xenobiology. Small gasps came from the audience as Miro switched effortlessly between 6 different languages, demonstrating the education he had received on Earth. Taya then stepped forward, her shy nature still evident but controlled as she recited a poem she had written that blended Narian and Earth imagery. Even little Pel contributed, proudly counting to 20 in Korean, Narian, and Standard. The toddler's mixed accent brought smiles to several council members' faces. As the children joined their parents, the Verdani council representative leaned forward. It is clear these young ones have benefited from their unusual situation, but the Narian government maintains that the initial marriage was fraudulent, a business arrangement rather than a genuine union. Tahoe addressed this directly. Our marriage began as a legal solution to an urgent problem, he acknowledged. But many unions throughout history have started from practical needs rather than romantic love. What matters is what we built together. He reached for Lena's hand, their fingers intertwining despite the different number. His 5. Her 4. 2 years ago, we were strangers from different worlds. Today, we are family in every way that matters. The act before you would protect others like us, those who form bonds across species lines, whether through marriage, adoption, or other family structures. The council adjourned to deliberate, leaving the family waiting in an antechamber. Miro occupied himself by explaining Earth physics to an interested Arcturian diplomat's child, while Taya drew patterns on a tablet, creating beautiful geometric designs that combined mathematical precision with artistic flair. You were magnificent, Tahoe told Lena quietly. All of you. 2 years ago, I could not imagine speaking to such important people, Lena replied. You changed that. You showed me I had value beyond my caste. Tahoe shook his head. I only provided opportunity. You discovered your own strength. A soft chime indicated the council had reached its decision. As they re-entered the chamber, Lena noticed several new faces in the audience, blue-skinned Narians wearing the simple clothing of the mining caste. Among them was the burly miner who had bid them farewell at New Horizon. The human chairperson stood. The council has reviewed all evidence regarding the proposed Interspecies Family Protection Act. We find that diverse family structures strengthen rather than weaken our united societies. The act is hereby ratified. Applause erupted across the chamber. The chairperson raised a hand for silence. Furthermore, in the specific case of the Kim family, we find no evidence of fraud. Their union, regardless of how it began, has demonstrated the very essence of family commitment. All claims against them by the Narian Mining Guild are dismissed permanently. The Narian consul's facial ridges darkened with anger, but he remained silent as the ruling continued. The Kim family's experience will serve as a precedent for future cases. Their model of adaptive family structure will be added to interspecies legal education programs throughout council space. Later that evening, a small celebration took place at Tahoe's estate, now truly the Kim family home. The Narian miners Lena had noticed in the audience were there, along with human friends and colleagues who had supported them through their challenges. "We heard your story on the deep space broadcasts," explained Doran, the burly miner from New Horizon. "It gave many of us courage to challenge the old ways. There are 23 mining families now applying for Earth work visas," added another miner. "The guild can no longer keep us in the dark about our rights." Miro proudly showed the visitors his laboratory, where he conducted experiments combining Earth and Narian scientific approaches. Taya had organized a small art exhibition of works created by children from both worlds. Even little Pell contributed, serving traditional Narian tea with careful concentration. As the evening wound down, Tahoe found Lena standing in the garden, watching the full moon rise over the trees that were just beginning to show spring buds. "Happy?" he asked simply. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied. "When I lived on New Horizon, I never saw beauty in simple things. Survival consumed everything." Tahoe stood beside her, comfortable in the silence they had learned to share. After a moment, Lena spoke again. "The children asked about our sleeping arrangements last week," she said with a slight darkening of her skin, the Narian equivalent of a blush. "What did you tell them?" Tahoe asked, curious. That Narian customs had been satisfied, and it was time to decide if we wished to follow all Earth marriage traditions. She turned to face him directly. "I told them we needed to discuss it." Tahoe smiled softly. "And what did you decide?" "That some Earth customs have merit," Lena replied, her four eyes meeting his two with newfound confidence. "And that what began as an arrangement of necessity has become something else entirely." "And what is that something else?" Tahoe asked, though he already knew the answer. "Family," Lena said simply. "Real family. Not by law or document or obligation, but by choice. Every day, we choose each other." From inside came the sound of children's laughter as Miro demonstrated some new scientific principle to his attentive audience. The house, once just Tahoe's quiet retreat, had transformed into a true home filled with life from two worlds. "When I begged to be your wife," Lena said softly, "I thought I was sacrificing myself." Tahoe took her four-fingered hand in his. "Instead, you taught me what family truly means." Their eyes met. Two human, four Narian, seen clearly at last. Above them, stars twinkled in the night sky, the same stars visible from both Earth and New Horizon, binding their worlds together just as they had bound two unlikely lives into one shared future.